We are back. We've got a wonderful guest, the man that inspired Randy Williams, I think, with his incredible outfit. And we're going to hear about Philippine travelers. We're going to hear about traveling in the pandemic. Welcome, Dondon Bales of Philippine Global Explorers.
Thank you for having me here. Quite excited to be here.
Yeah, and we planned this uh, show some weeks ago to time it with an Australian holiday, but I've recently, actually this weekend, got a number of APS messages from different members about travel shaming, about arguments about the politics of travel during the pandemic, and I figured I coincidentally have a wonderful person to, in a positive and measured way, explain, because you with the Philippine Global Explorers are putting on a video series about travel during the pandemic.
That's right. So, our group, the Philippine Global Explorers, which is a community of Filipino travelers all over the world, that's aimed to harvest, our experience to create awareness and advocacy. One of the things we've started to do this month is to launch our pandemic traveler series. And so it's a series of YouTube live broadcasts where we invite globetrotters who have traveled during the pandemic in this period this year and share their experiences, what it's like for them when they travel, the different countries, and what safety measures have they done,
Mhm.
and what their experience has been like, right? And to dispel some of the myths uh, that's associated with traveling during the pandemic. So we've just started it last 1st of November, and we'll be continuing that series over the YouTube channel.
And you just, as you said, the first episode just came out, and we'll add in the show notes how to find you all and tune in. What have you learned from this first episode and talking with the upcoming guests about what travel is like in 2020?
Yeah. So the first thing I learned is really to still be safe and really keep the basics. Basics being wear a mask, wash your hands, and keep social distancing. So these are non-negotiable, things to keep oneself safe and others safe as well. So that's very key. We did a survey within the Philippine travelers group who've traveled as well during the pandemic, and 100% of the people said that wearing a mask is the one thing that you need to do to while you're traveling during these times. I also learned, some of the to dispel some of the myths that I thought was there during the pandemic. The first
Mhm.
one was I thought the locals, would be resistant to the idea of travelers being in their city,
Mm.
right? So, based on the first guest, Bobby, who was our first guest, he mentioned that the locals were actually quite receptive and were quite happy to see travelers visit them.
Mm.
So I suppose that could be because it's a sign of hope for things to come in terms of having the tourism and the economy open up again,
Mhm.
or people who have been in lockdown or in quarantine. It's quite a good kind of there's some refreshing environment of having someone new or come in. So that was one thing I learned, that yeah, that was a myth I thought about people not being happy having travelers in their place. The other myth I thought prices of airfares and accommodations were rising, and so it becomes more expensive to travel. And actually, that wasn't the case apparently. So I'm glad that isn't the case. So airlines and accommodations kept their prices still at reasonable rates.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was also good. And then the other thing was, sometimes traveling at this time is even a safer option when, you're the only one traveling in what usually would be a very crowded tourist spot, right?
Mm.
Same. So, you know, there's no one else there. So, the risk is lower when you do that. So yeah, these were just some of the things I learned, from, at least that was just from one guest speaker, and we have a number of speakers upcoming. So I'm looking forward to learn what they've got to say.
Oh, that's fantastic, and I've been so interested that so many groups, I mean, have have tried to avoid avoid the hard subject, and you guys are a new travel organization, and you're going straight into it, and
I know it is quite controversial, right? Especially for world travelers. It's like at one point you say, and there were some hard questions asked, right? Like one of the questions asked was, how do you respond to critics that say by traveling around the world, is it like encouraging risky behavior, for example, right?
mm,
So it's quite controversial in that way, but I think it's really more about perspective. You travel safely. You exercise a level of prudence when you travel.
hmm
You follow the rules, right? And yeah, like here in Australia, for example. So I live in Melbourne, Australia, and we've been in one of perhaps arguably the longest lockdown in the world. We've
mm,
been in lockdown for 4 months. Like
hmm
we had curfews. We can't go out of the house until only until 8 p.m. Pretty much until 5 a.m. It's on curfew. We couldn't go out more than 5 kilometers where we live, and we can only go out for four reasons, which is to either go buy some food, go to work, or to school when it's absolutely necessary, to get medical care, or do exercise. And
mm,
those were the only four reasons you can be allowed or risk a fine of more than $1,500, $600, for example. So it was pretty much strict like that. So our concept of travel was now limited to, okay, we need to do exercise and go to the nearby beach. That was travel
mm,
for us, or go to the park. And you started to really become a traveler in your own city and
hmm
really get familiarized, and really to be grateful with what limited freedom we had during that lockdown. And we recently opened up, so I'm really quite excited that we've opened up within Melbourne, but at the same time being mindful that we still need to exercise, safety. We still have to wear masks when we go out, and maintain social distance, wash our hands, the basics, so that
hmm
we can continue to enjoy the freedoms that we get now. Now, like last night, today is our Melbourne Cup Day. That's our public holiday where we celebrate horse racing.
mm.
Where else in the world do you get a public holiday for horse racing? So only here in Australia. So it's Melbourne Cup Day today. So anyway, last night on the eve of Melbourne Cup Day, first time I went out after our long lockdown, I went to Chapel Street, one of the famous streets here in Melbourne. There were some restaurants open, and we had our al fresco dining in a Mexican restaurant.
Ah,
So I was so happy. It's like, wow, this is good. It's
uh-huh.
kind of getting some sense of normality again,
hmm
at the same time still maintaining that measures of safety.
And you do live in what's often regarded as one of the most livable cities in the world. So I guess if you had complained even a bit, everybody would say they'd be happy to trade with you.
Yeah, that's right. And we're really keen now. We're now heading towards our Australian summertime.
Mm,
So yeah, it's really good now to go outdoors. And when we were in our strict lockdown, incidentally, it was during our winter, so it was
hmm
actually not that bad, because I would have I would have kept indoors anyway rather than being out on a cold winter.
mm.
So
You somehow were able to emigrate to Australia without passing the swimming test.
yes, I did.
And yet now you're a scuba diver, which I've not, even though I was swimming from very little. So talk about growing up not learning to swim, and how you did.
I know. So ironically, I was born in an island country, right? So I
hmm
was born in the Tacloban city. It's an
hmm
island uh, in Leyte, which is
hmm
the island near Cebu, for those of
hmm
you who are familiar in the geography there.
hmm
And even while growing up there, I didn't even learn how to swim. I was afraid of swimming in the open ocean. Right?
mm,
So as soon as my feet stops reaching the ocean floor, I'd panic. So there you go. Anyway, and so yeah, and then I managed to live in Australia without really learning how to swim. I
mhm,
actually kind of learned how to kind of at least float by accident. And this was during when I was started to travel. So as
Mhm.
you see, when I was traveling in South America, in one of the places in the Atacama Desert,
Uh-huh.
uh, there was this spot where you have to jump from this hole and you end up in this water, and people were doing that, and I said I couldn't just pass on that opportunity not to experience that. And I knew I didn't know how to swim, but I did it
Mm.
anyway. So I
Ah.
jumped off, splashed in the water. I was like, I better survive this, right?
Yeah.
And there are things you learn, for a non-swimmer, that what things, salt water, you actually float. You'll
Mm.
actually survive. You just don't panic. You can
Mhm.
paddle like a dog and you can get back to shore. So I was so relieved I survived, right? And since then I've been jumping off from a boat in Rio. We were in a
Mm.
party boat. People were jumping off to the bay of Rio. And I did that again knowing I didn't know how to swim. I had like a small floater with me just in case. So I survived that. And then as I traveled through Southeast Asia,
Mhm.
you go to places where you jump off from trees and then
Mhm.
you land. And so yeah, it just became I became accustomed to that. And
Mhm.
then the biggest thing that I was really happy was when I learned how to snorkel. So during my trips, there's some beautiful places where it would be a shame not to snorkel. Places like the
Mhm.
Galapagos, some beaches in Thailand, even in the Philippines. And so I first took baby steps, just having a snorkeling mask and
Mhm.
fins. And
Mhm.
when I learned, oh, I can actually float with this, and then eventually I let go of the fins. And so now I am confident that as long as I have a snorkel, I can pretty much float and appreciate snorkeling. And by the time I went to the uh,
Mhm.
here in Australia,
Mhm.
the coral reefs, it's like wow, it was amazing, and I'm so grateful to have learned how to snorkel. Right. So
Fantastic. Yeah. I You mentioned Philippines. We've talked about Philippines in your home country. I think it sounds like you might be guilty, like many of us are, of neglecting your native country in terms of travel. Is that true, or have you traveled the country extensively?
well, I have traveled the country extensively before I
Oh.
left the Philippines. So when I knew
Mm.
that I was, immigrating for Australia, I wanted to make sure that I've
Mm.
done some of my big bucket lists, like El Nido, Boracay, and in Mindanao. So I think the year before I moved to Australia, I took every opportunity, like on the weekends when I'm not working, to kind of jump on a plane and go to an island in the Philippines. Because I knew once I'm in Australia, it's going to be very difficult to
Mhm.
explore back. And whenever I go back to the Philippines, and I try to go back, every other year to
Mhm.
visit my family there,
Mhm.
and I always try to put a side trip to see new things that I haven't been yet. And it just amazes me. There are still new areas that I'm still amazed. New discoveries for me.
Yeah, one you mentioned Mindanao, and I was going to ask you. I mean, that's a large territory that when it makes the international news, it's never good. But I'm sure that there's so much of wonder to see for I would guess for Filipinos from different regions of the country. It's seems a bit exotic, or I guess in the U.S. we might call it the Wild West.
Yes, it's just knowing, where it's all about timing as well, and knowing where it's safe
Mhm.
to go at a
Mhm.
specific point in time. So, for
Mhm.
example, last year, during my last visit in the Philippines, I went to Davao City. It's
Mm.
one of the biggest cities, and I actually really liked it there. I went to
Mhm.
Samal Island, really nice
Mhm.
beach over there. I also went to Siargao, and Siargao is really one of the really good. I love Siargao. There's good surfing in there.
Mhm.
That's also in Mindanao. And many years ago, I also went to Cagayan de Oro City and in Camiguin Island. So there are really some really good some good spots in Mindanao.
Mhm.
The safe spots. And so yeah, but I have yet to visit some other areas in Mindanao in the future, and I just need to really be to exercise prudence and safety in mind when I plan these trips.
How do Filipinos think about their regions of the country? Or I mean, we've got lists like Nomad Mania that attempt to divide up countries, and sometimes they go by the national, state, or province boundaries. Others by regions. You mentioned a few highlights. What for somebody that's got a bit of time on their hands, thinking about a systematic approach to get a very wide survey of the Philippines? How would you begin to structure it?
Yeah, so there are, the Philippines are divided into, regions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are provinces there. And, there is a sense of regional pride as
Mm-hmm.
well,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because of the dialect that people speak. So, for
Mm.
example, when I grew up in Leyte, we speak a specific dialect called Waray, right?
Mm.
Which is a very different dialect when you go to Cebu, because in
Mm.
Cebu, they speak Bisaya there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but because we're neighboring kind of provinces, I kind of understand little bits of the
Mm.
language of the dialect, and so yeah, I kind of appreciate the having different types of dialects, but also some of the
Mm.
similarities of these
Mm-hmm.
dialects. And
Mm.
so as soon as you travel to one area, one region in the Philippines, people can distinguish that, oh, you're from somewhere else
Mm-hmm.
because of your accent, of the dialect, you know some people in Luzon who don't speak Bisaya, if they go to
Mm-hmm.
the Visayas and Mindanao region, you can tell they're from a different area because they can't speak Bisaya. They can't speak the dialect,
Mm-hmm.
right? They speak the national language pretty much. So yeah, that's kind of been there. So there is a sense of regional pride, but the one thing that keeps everyone you know common is being able to speak the national language, the Filipino language, based in the Tagalog language.
Hmm, excellent. And for the foodie travelers, I mean, there's no wrong answer. There's fantastic food everywhere. But how do you start choosing or thinking? Are there, say people are vegetarian, or they love the fruits, they love the wonderfully fattening meat dishes. Where how do you start thinking and identifying where you're going to have that foodie trip?
Well, in my experience, whenever I go to the Philippines, I almost unable to gain weight, right? So, because first of all, I go there mostly during the Christmas period, so there's lots of food, a lot of like meat, a lot of sweets,
Uh-huh.
right? One of our favorite dishes is lechon. It's roasted pig. It's
Mm.
really good. And so there's a lot of unique Filipino dishes,
Mhm.
like adobo,
Mhm.
kare kare. These are like meat sometimes cooked with with peanut butter,
Mhm.
pretty much like kare kare, or a lot of fatty food, I have to say. So a word
we
of
we were
warning
just that
for those.
seafood city, U.S. West Coast
Yeah.
Philippine chain, and yeah, everything looks so delicious. And we joke with the staff at the seafood section, because we always ask, how do you cook this fish? And they always say fry. And can we steam it? Fry only. They do such wonderful fried fish, and these. I mean, just this incredible, and they have food court and different restaurants there, and it's, yeah, everything looks sinful, and everything smells wonderful, and everything we've tried is delicious.
Yeah, very much so. You've got a selection of seafoods,
Hmm.
meat foods, and there's some distinct fruits as well. Like in Mindanao, in Davao, you've got
Mm.
durian as well, which is also present in some of the other
Hmm. Hmm.
neighboring countries. Yep.
Is there a confluence of a famous beach destination that also is a superlative food destination? I think parts of the world, saying Caribbean, the food and the beach don't always mix in the same immediate proximity. They may be quite far apart. Other places it seems to harmonize in one fantastic location. So again,
Oh yeah.
is there one that the beach? Of course, there's just endless incredible beaches, but especially paired with the food that really jumps out for you.
Well, the good thing about the beaches in the Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
for example, you can just bring your own food pretty much. Home cooked
Mm.
meals, eat that with
Mm.
banana leaves. It's like a
Mm.
fiesta, pretty much
Yeah.
shared with, families and friends. So it's
Mhm.
always like a celebration when we go to the beach.
Mm.
So interestingly, the Philippines has a lot of really nice beaches. So
Hmm.
I'm writing a travel book at the
Oh.
moment that will launch next month.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've in one of the sections in that book is pretty much the bucket lists as well as some of the favorite destinations of the most traveled Filipinos. And one of the questions I've asked them is, what is your most favorite beach in the world? And so
Mm.
I kind of surveyed, uh, you know, based on our collective experience, some of the best beaches of the world. And I have to
Hmm.
say, there is, and not because we're from the Philippines, but it just came up like maybe three or four beaches, top 10 beaches there, are in the Philippines. And it's no secret, right? Like you've got El Nido in Palawan,
Hmm.
you've got Coron in Palawan, and you've got Boracay as well. And
Hmm.
that's already three, of the
Hmm.
top beaches in the Philippines. And yeah, so, and there are other, beaches yet that they're not as famous as these three, but nevertheless they're still as good, and and they will be revealed in the book. So
Ah.
watch out. There you go.
And for people who really enjoy urban settings, that let's say visas whatever allows people to spend a few months, they can work remotely. Uh, what city? Doesn't it could be an area of Manila, but of course there's so many cities. What are really enjoyable, walkable food markets, fun urban settings to spend some time in?
Right. Well, in Manila, there's always the Binondo area, the
Mm-hmm.
Filipino Chinese area. There's really some good
Mm-hmm.
food there. So that's
Mm-hmm.
a really good food trip to go.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in Cebu City, so that's also a big urban area, there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of food places, like where the lechon,
Mm-hmm.
the roasted pig are, that's famous in Cebu.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so there's this kind of like within the urban areas, there are some specific, you can go to the market pretty much buy
Mm-hmm.
fresh seafood and
Mm-hmm.
cook it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's back to basics pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best
Is,
way to
is
describe
is there
it.
a digital nomad? I guess it was before digital nomads. You had people hanging out in Philippines.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that, right? It's actually good to become a digital nomad
Uh-huh.
in the Philippines,
Uh-huh.
though I'm still waiting for the internet infrastructure to
Uh-huh.
improve. So
Okay.
it's not yet the best if you
Mm.
in comparison to some of the other countries
Mhm.
internet wise,
Okay.
but as soon as the internet improves,
Mhm.
like I'm like what some yeah I've got some places there that would be really good digital nomad areas. For example, Siargao. I can imagine Siargao to be something like Bali.
Mm.
Give it a really good internet boost. Yeah,
Okay.
that's perfectly one of them, right?
Mm.
And in Palawan as well, give it a good internet boost. There are some really good places there that could be a digital nomad haven. And
Mm.
even in Cebu, right? And
Mhm.
even in Cebu, Bohol, and
Mhm.
Dumaguete. So
Mm.
yeah, so yeah, hopefully, and the government has started to really, uh, put some initiatives to kind of improve that infrastructure.
George is asking, COVID allowing, I am planning to be in Lapu-Lapu on the next April 27th for the 500th anniversary of Magellan's death. He notes he is Portuguese. Anything I should be aware of?
Oh, well, enjoy being in Cebu.
Mm.
Well, Cebu being an island, don't limit yourself just in Cebu City, right?
Mm.
Cebu as a destination is a really good place to explore. You can go up in the north,
Mhm.
go to some of the really nice beaches in Bantayan Island and Malapascua, and you
Mm.
can also go to the south and
Mhm.
go to see some of the whale sharks in Oslob and
Mhm.
do yeah. So yeah, just don't limit yourself within the city. You can also go north and south.
Mm.
And that's all
Okay.
within Cebu. And then you can always jump off a ferry and go to Bohol as well and see the chocolate hills and the tarsiers. And then you can even go further south to Dumaguete and Siquijor. So that's
Mm.
the really good advantage of Cebu being strategically located in the center. So yeah, do plan to have side trips And I know the key kind of purpose is to see that anniversary
Hmm.
uh, of the Lapu-Lapu Monument. But yeah, take the opportunity to travel as well around the surrounding areas.
No, you are a wonderful ambassador for your native land, and as I understand the book you mentioned that you're working on, it's um, uh, beyond you. It's a number of members of the most traveled Filipinos. Their stories of all different age groups and backgrounds.
Yeah, that's right. It is titled Explore Next Level Stories of the Most Traveled Filipinos. I was
Mhm,
excited with this project because there has never been, such project in the past where
mhm,
you collect the collective experience and stories of, at least in this case, I've interviewed like 20 different, Filipinos from different backgrounds.
mhm,
We're all based in different places, and
mhm,
and incidentally, now that we've formed the Philippine Global Explorers, which
mhm,
is a community of Filipino travelers, we were able. It made it easy as well. Some of
mhm,
them I met through the group, some of them I invited to join, and now we have this really good niche of
mhm,
uh, you know um, community where we meet on a regular basis to share our learnings with each other. And so the book is kind of a reflection of that. It reflects,
mhm,
our background stories. We came from different backgrounds. Some of them, we have, one of them is a former jeepney driver, and he was able to travel like more than 100 countries and territories, right? He
mhm,
ended up being in the cruising, seafarer industry.
mhm,
And then another one is an educator, professor in the university. And then we've got travel operators, travel agents. We've got someone who is a famous, travel blogger. We have someone who's a famous travel YouTuber,
mhm,
right? And we have corporate professionals like myself who works in IT. So it's really interesting to gather these stories from different backgrounds and how we all have this love for travel, and all of us have traveled more than 100 countries and territories. We eventually got there, right? For
wow,
whatever background, whatever
mhm,
circumstance we were in, we made it happen. So I love to harvest that story because I wanted to inspire other people that, no matter what circumstance you're in, as long as you have that dream and that vision and that passion for travel, you can do it. Like there's no excuse, right? So
mhm,
yeah, and I baked in some of our collective learnings, things like, how you can pack light, or how you can earn miles, how you can,
mhm,
make the most of the travel tools and apps out there. How can you, some of these practical learnings that,
mhm.
we've learned as we traveled. I put that in as well. So it's all about sharing that knowledge, that collective knowledge, to inspire future aspiring travelers.
That sounds incredible. We're looking forward to it next month, and it's yeah, it's an interesting dilemma in a sense that in a way you're trying to overcome the reputation of being such an incredibly nice people, right? Because it's just about everybody will say Filipinos. I mean, just so wonderfully friendly and that, but you're also advocating for a less superficial understanding, a deeper appreciation of the variety of experiences out there.
Yeah, that's true. It really, especially in the book, I wanted to share some of the cultures and traditions that are, unique in the Philippines as well. Some of the core values that we share, such as our love for our families.
Hmm.
Some people outside of the Philippine setting, uh, would start to understand. For example, there's that. I'll give an example. One of the examples would be kind of an inherent kind of support that we give to our families.
Hmm.
So for people who work overseas, so as you mentioned, you can find Filipinos all over the world, right?
Hmm.
Our overseas Filipino workers and migrant workers. I'm a migrant myself.
Hmm.
you know we all this, from our earnings, we give back to our families back in the Philippines. Like a
Hmm.
big chunk of the economy that goes back to the Philippines comes from the remittance from all the overseas Filipino workers all over the world, from the
Hmm.
dollars that have been saved. So
Hmm.
that helps the country. And that is an inherent value in, Filipino families, helping each other, helping the family.
Mm.
And then going back to the Philippines, we have this term called balikbayan, where people who live overseas, they come back to the Philippines. We are the balikbayans,
Mm.
and you're the ambassador of the Philippines in other places around the world.
Are you welcomed back then? It sounds like, I mean, some countries it's a very a mixed feeling, especially if it's the people who come back and visit. But it sounds like it's a much more cohesive cultural embrace for you all.
So yeah, I mean, balikbayans, people overseas. Yeah, it's very common for people to come back to the Philippines, visit
Mm.
their families for vacations, and people love that. So normally, I remember before, when when as a migrant and I went back to the Philippines. Normally, if you're a foreigner, you're only allowed a certain number of days. As a
Okay.
tourist,
Hmm.
it's almost like a 21-day rule back in the
Okay.
time. But
Okay.
if you're a balikbayan, you're kind of allowed, an extended period of time to stay in the
Ah,
Philippines, pretty much, because they kind of understand that you have family and friends you're based in the Philippines. So, limiting yourself to a 21-day stay, that's
sure.
ridiculous. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something so particular about so many of the situations of Filipinos working overseas would be ones where their family cannot accompany them, so
exactly.
they are alone for that period. I'm curious those communities. I was an expat. I lived in China for a decade, and had a bit of that feeling of being very different in a very big place. What are some of the insights? And when you're traveling, do you interact with a lot of the Filipinos you come across, and what insights do you have to that lifestyle, that in some ways very lonely lifestyle that they do for themselves and their families?
Yeah, it's always, when I travel, and then the one thing I'll recognize if there's a Filipino there, because I'll hear someone speaking the language, and I
Mhm.
said, "Oh, there's a Filipino there. That's good." Like, familiar language. That's the one thing. And obviously, if you get invited to their homes, you get the benefit of enjoying home cooked
Mm.
Filipino meals,
Yeah.
which is always good,
Mhm.
and a lot of storytelling
Mhm.
as well. So it's always good. I especially enjoy being in cruise ships. There's a lot
Oh.
of Filipinos in cruise ships, and if they know you're from the Philippines, they'll
Mm.
give you extra service. That's like, wow, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Really. So really
Yeah,
good.
I was
There's
thinking
some perks
if
to
you
that.
want two desserts, you get two desserts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's good in that way.
That's that's fantastic, and you've got some of your friends watching in. I see Ronaldo from from watching from the Philippines tonight. Louisa from Miami. Riza Rasco. I have no idea where she is, but she agrees with my assessment that Filipinos are one of the most traveled nationalities. So it's
Mm.
great to see this community coming out and this advocacy. What's your vision for the organization? You've got, I mean, you're fully established as a nonprofit organization in the Philippines. You've started this video series, outreach, and it's an impressive and very fast growth.
Yeah, so our mission is to bring together Filipino travelers around the world, right,
Hmm.
and harness that collective knowledge and experience to
Hmm.
benefit the Philippines.
Mm.
And so we do that. Our vision is to be able to create positive impact through thought leadership,
Hmm.
education, culture, tourism, and international relations.
Hmm.
Anything that will create awareness in sustainable travel,
Mm.
responsible, safe travel, and educating the youth to inspire them, to explore the world. What better way to learn
Mm.
than traveling? As we most of us world travelers know, yeah, there is no substitute for learning history or learning cultures than to see it firsthand when you travel, right? And you actually have fun doing so. So we want to instill that value, inspiring people to do that as well. Not
Mm.
to be afraid of travel. A lot of people may have some fears around, safety and
Mhm.
around, is it safe to do that? Dangerous places.
Mhm.
And as we come to know when we travel, there's actually more, a lot of good people out there, like a lot of generous people out there, and just sharing that experience so that
Mhm.
there's actually more good out
Mhm.
there in the world, and we get to discover that when we travel. So we want to share that. We want to share that vision to people.
Well, that's wonderful, and we've been remiss in talking about your own travelers, and many travelers when they introduce themselves to this group will say what they've done, and you instead said you don't know how to use a DSLR, you have a phobia for
I
stray
know.
dogs, you all these things you are not, and that's certainly very humble. I'm curious.
I
It's
mean,
such a creative way to present yourself. I love it.
thank you. But then, I just realized by doing that, I didn't let my limitations or the things that I don't know get in the way of me
Mm,
traveling. For example, one key basic, I guess, skill that some people may take for granted is driving a car.
mhm,
For the longest time, I didn't know how to drive a car, right? And I remember vividly there are some places I wish I knew how I could drive a car. I was in Hawaii, for example, and I wish I knew how to drive and drive a car in Hawaii. Otherwise, I ended up hitchhiking, obviously, to get my way around it. I only got my full license here in Australia this year for the
mm.
first time, and it was only 3 years ago that I applied for my learner's permit, and I was still afraid, driving a car. Like, what if I bumps into someone, right? But then I
Mhm,
realized that's a very important skill, when you travel, and I definitely want to learn that so that in the future when I travel, I can, hire a car, go somewhere. It gives me more options to do, right? So that's just one item. Another one I'm considering is studying a language, right?
mhm,
A new language. So um, I wanted to either improve my Spanish,
mhm,
mainly because Spanish is quite, a lot of the Filipino words are close to Spanish, so it's easier to
mm,
learn.
mm.
And the other thing I'm considering is I might want to really study French, because when I go
Oh,
to Africa, and I haven't traveled extensively in Africa, I think I've only been to 5 countries in Africa. There are some areas there that speak French, and it would be an advantage to be able to speak to the locals in French, right?
that
So
would be
I said,
fantastic. Yeah.
that's something in my kind of bucket list. And yeah, and my friend just lent me a DSLR so I can start learning and tinker how to play with that. So that next time, because for example, one of my bucket list, I wanted to see the aurora borealis in the north part of the north hemisphere, and you can't just take a picture of that through a mobile phone. Well, I think the new
Mm.
phones can do that now, but to take a proper photo of the aurora, you would have to use a DSLR. Right? So, and I'd like to keep to do that, to capture as a memory. So yeah, I mean, I still have a lot of things to learn, and this time during the pandemic, where we couldn't travel as much, I used that time to learn. I used that time to write a travel book. I
Mhm.
used that time to probably learn a new language, learn all these gaps, so that when I can travel again, then yeah, I can apply it and have a more enriched experience of travel.
Mm. Oh, that's wonderful. I had intended to learn French. I had intended to uh, learn Spanish, and Equatorial Guinea was the end of my plan to learn Spanish. That I had made it to every Spanish-speaking UN country, and somehow gotten by. But I certainly wish, having learned Mandarin Chinese, that the travel experiences are so much more rich when you can communicate in someone's language. I mean, the depth, the insight, the way you can relate to people. So that's fantastic. And I haven't even tried a DSLR, but I did buy a new, slightly better point and shoot in January in Hong Kong, and I haven't touched it yet, because then immediately I had no reason to, to take it out. But,
Yeah.
I'm catching up with all the comments here. You've got one of my good friends, Christopher Gao. He has just learned of PGE, and he's ready to put in his application. So he's one of your diaspora as well, and a great friend from the U.S. and then in Shanghai, China. So you've got a new recruit already, and you have plenty of fans for fried food, and they are all eager for the book. And so that is December. That you said will be available Amazon and Audible.
Yep.
So looking forward to that. That's incredible. That you
Yeah,
got
I'm quite
this
excited.
wonderful.
I'm quite excited myself. It's really a it is a collaborative project across the 20 other world travelers like myself,
Hmm.
who've generously shared their experience, their
Hmm.
knowledge and wisdom, and we've pretty much captured that in one book, kind
Hmm.
of showcasing, how we get from point A to point B,
Hmm.
ended up being world travelers, how we, are the different stories, funny stories, inspiring stories. It's
Hmm.
all in that book. And then our collective learnings of tips and tricks in traveling that we've learned through the years. We're sharing that there, as well as our bucket list. If you
Hmm.
want to know, what are our favorite beaches in the world, our favorite alternative seven wonders of the world, our favorite countries in the world, we kind of collect, it's almost like a mini survey amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
What are the top 10 from our perspective? And I was quite surprised myself with some of the results, right? When I saw that, it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Oh, I'm so excited, yeah, to hear that perspective of each different group of travelers creates lists and in their own sense. And speaking of wonders of the world, you had a big trip in 2013 visiting wonders of the world.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, the first wonder I visited was in the Colosseum in Rome,
Mm,
and that was way earlier in 2007, sorry, 2006, when I first visited Italy, and actually it was my first trip to Europe, my very first time. And I was assigned for work in Milan. And I said, I need to take the opportunity to, take a train, go to Rome and see Rome. And there you go. I got to see the Colosseum. And since then, I was always inspired to see all the seven wonders of the world. Um,
mhm,
and so during that big trip in 2012 and 2013, I made sure that as part of my itinerary, you know, in my travel segments, I do capture, getting to these places. So when I went to South America, I did the Inca Trail and ended up seeing the Machu Picchu, right? But doing it with an Inca Trail at the back of that was even was exciting as well, because I remember, like, doing a lot of hiking, and it was raining, and in my tent with, sleeping with wet socks. I was
mhm,
like so miserable. I just want to finish it. But then at the end of it, I get to see Machu Picchu. So that was one of, the highlights there. And then I ended up going to Carnival, see the Carnival in February of
mhm,
2012 in Rio, and obviously and
mhm,
got to see the Christ Redeemer statue there and enjoy, the festivities of the Carnival.
mhm,
And at the time, I realized, how I wish I had my Philippine passport with me, so I can have easy entry into Brazil, because at the
mhm,
time I was traveling using my Australian passport, and I had to wait for 2 weeks in Buenos Aires to get my visa. And if I had my Philippine passport with me, it would have been just an easy entry, and I would have missed Carnival. I would have regretted it, right? So really happy that I managed to see that. And then as I worked my way up, to Central America, ended up in Mexico, in Yucatan, where I got to see the Chichen Itza. It's like, wow, to see the Mayan, it would be
mhm.
good. And that year I was traveling, if you remember, back in 2012, that was when they said it was going to be the end of the world in December
Oh, sure.
2012. So that was the year that's like, there was some hype when I got there. It's like, oh, that's really interesting. Good timing. And then later on, when I was traveling in Middle East, then I remember, I had plans to see the Petra in Jordan as part of the Seven Wonders.
Mhm,
And my initial attempt to get to Jordan, I had to cancel my initial flight. I was in United Arab Emirates at the time. The Arab Spring was started to happen in Jordan. I said, "Oh, I'm having some considerations whether I should push through with this trip or not." Right. However, I still pushed through with it, and I was glad. I get to see the Petra. Uh, I got to meet some Bedouin people. I really enjoyed that. And then I ended up going to Taj Mahal in India as well. I had a surreal experience getting there because it was a trip from Nepal and India. And then from Nepal, I actually flew to Varanasi to see the Ganges River first. And then
Hmm.
from Varanasi, I took a plane that connects, that goes to Agra and then goes to another city in India. And I remember this vividly. I was in a plane that landed in Agra, right? It was a full plane, and Agra
Hmm.
was like a stopover, and they said, okay, anyone who's stopping in Agra, you can go down now, right? And I was the
Hmm.
only person in the entire plane who stood up and then went out of the plane, and then the plane took off. It's like, that's so surreal, right?
Hmm.
And then I ended up going to China. Uh, I went to China as a starting point to do a Trans-Siberian trip that will lead me from Mongolia all the way to Russia. So as part of the
Hmm.
China trip, I ended up, of course, I said I wanted to see the Great Wall of China. And so I did. And then little did I know, a year later on, I'll be living in China. I'll be living in Beijing for work for 2 months. So I ended up going back to the Great Wall of China 3 times,
Hmm.
essentially. And in one of those times, I ended up going to the very start of the Great Wall, which they
Hmm.
call the Dragon Head, where the head of the wall starts from the ocean. And then the Great Wall of China begins. And I
Hmm.
was so appreciative to get there. And I don't speak Chinese. So what I
Hmm.
did to get around that is, one of my colleague, who's Chinese, I was with him in my mobile phone talking to him, and then I'll tell him, hey, tell the taxi driver to bring me here, and then I'll give the mobile phone to the taxi driver, and he'll speak
Hmm.
Chinese to the taxi driver to get me to where I need to be. So, not learning a language is not an excuse. I just had to be resourceful to get to where I want. And doing that was one of the technique I had to use. I needed, someone who knows the language and let them speak to the local of what I want to do. And I got there anyway. So it's all about being resourceful, being creative,
Hmm.
and making the most of what you have. And, it got me to the places where I thought I'd never be.
Oh, that's fantastic, wonderful, and you're over 100 UN countries. We're looking forward when you're unleashed again from your uh, lockdown in the city of paradise. In closing, you've got to tell us about your incredible outfit.
Oh, yes. So when I was traveling early on, I was what I would call a hoarder of souvenirs. Like, I'd buy anything. I'd buy a T-shirt. I'd buy,
Hmm.
fridge magnets. I'd buy bulky souvenirs. And then I realized, I was carrying a backpack, and I said, if I continue this way, and I've got like 21 months to go,
Hmm.
right? This backpack will be like two backpacks. I actually ended up probably in my first 2 months of travel accumulating a bag of souvenirs, which I had to
Hmm.
ship back to Australia. Right?
Hmm.
I said I
Hmm.
could. That's not sustainable. So I had to look at what is a creative way where I can get some souvenir of a place.
Hmm.
And I got to see some of these backpacks that had badges on. I said, you know what, I'd like that. But I thought I didn't want to put it in a bag because
Hmm.
I thought, if I'd be carrying a bag with a lot of patches, I'd be a target. People would
Hmm.
recognize that I'm a traveler, and they might take advantage of me. So I said, okay, I'll probably avoid putting it in a very flashy backpack. So
Hmm.
I thought, but I'd like a souvenir like that. So I ended up buying this red shirt in Bolivia, in La
Uh-huh.
Paz. And I said, from there on, I'm going to start a collection of buying badges, and I'm going to get them sewn in each part, like
Yeah.
either flags or, cities. And so that started this collection, right, of
Hmm.
a shirt with badges. As you can see, I have the flag of the Philippines here and the flag of Australia here. So my place of birth and, you know, where I'm living now. So they're back there. I had a badge of the Olympics in
Uh-huh.
London when I visited that. So really key highlights of a place.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes if I can't buy a badge, I'll buy a
Uh-huh.
souvenir, let's say a cap, and I'll
Uh-huh.
rip off the badge from the cap. And then I'll
Ah.
put it in the shirt just to have a souvenir. And so what ended up there, I had the different flags. And as you can see at the back,
Uh-huh.
I've got pretty much the whole shirt filled up. And sometimes I'd made friendly, I'll because I'm playful in some ways. I'll put some really playful, like put Israel beside United Arab Emirates,
Oh,
and
wow,
then
that's you. You have foresight.
yeah, just so have friendly relationships. And then as soon as my shirt finished, I ran out of space, right? I said, I need to continue this, right? And so I ended up putting it in my trousers, my traveling pants. So I ended up putting it here, as you can see now. I ended up putting it here. I'm going to stand up here so you can see my pants. And so I ended up like filling up the whole pants. And I said, okay, what now? What's next? So now I'm actually now with my jacket. So I'm actually started my jacket collection here, and with some of the travels I've done recently in the Caribbean last year, and there's still space back here. There you go. So I still have a lot of way to go. But wearing this is like my travel uniform.
Mhm.
And it's always a good conversation starter. I've met a lot of people, just like I've met just people approach me, having a chat about what I'm wearing. Some of them became really good friends of mine. A good friend of mine from South Africa who I visited, I met in United Arab Emirates in the Ferrari um, you
Mhm.
know place there, because it all started from a conversation about this costume, right?
Mm.
And then people wanted to take pictures with me with this. And yeah, it was really good. I enjoyed it. So whenever I get a chance to wear it, I will, right? So
Oh, that's
yeah.
fantastic. And as Anne says, you've got the whole world on you, literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Nolan wants to know the countries that are on the seat of your pants.
The countries on the seat of my pants. I actually didn't really think about what I'm gonna put there. Like at the time, whatever available
Uh,
space, I do put some logic on how I place them. So
mm,
originally I said this will be countries in Europe, this
mm,
will be countries in South America.
mm,
So I kind of lumped some countries together. So like these are some countries in Asia, like at
mhm,
this part. So it's easy for me to remember like where these are,
mm.
and you know, reminding me of the flags. Like, oh yeah, I remember that's the flag of this country. So really have an appreciation of that.
That
So yeah,
is.
it's kind of my little travel souvenir. And I said, one day, it's kind of like a museum material. You hang your, traveling outfit.
Uh-huh.
All the places you've been. And so yeah, that's been this has been my souvenir that's
Mm,
been, you know, accumulated along the way. The only other souvenir that I do, which is really interesting, is I also started posting myself postcards in my
mhm,
own address. So because I collect stamps
mhm,
as well, so I said, okay, I will post myself, postcards. And so by the end of my first long, world trip, I pretty much accumulated like over 100 plus, postcards from different cities around the world. And I was excited to even, some of the more interesting, postcards I got to send myself was, for example, the one in Antarctica, where there was a post office there in Antarctica. It's like I have to send a postcard to myself from this place, and then it takes months to get there, right? So I wonder how long it will arrive, right?
uh-huh.
And yeah, so yeah, sending a postcard to myself was indeed one of the souvenir, lightweight. So it's all about continuing to travel light, right? Because especially for long distance travel for a long period of time, I um, earlier a few years back when I was still collecting bulky things, one of my collections was to collect landmarks. Like
Mhm,
I'll have a miniature, Statue of Liberty, or a miniature Vatican City replica, or a
mhm,
miniature, Eiffel Tower,
mhm.
you know so that was good to collect at that time. And they're all in my parents house at the moment. They said, we can make a little mini museum out of that.
Mm.
But now, for now, this is the museum, like the outfit that is the museum.
That is incredible. Yeah, we're hearing, and Daryl says pure ingenuity. Anne says you could pass as a national treasure. So yes, we need to list you to the Philippine national treasures. There was a question if I collect any souvenirs, and there's nothing I can compare. Nothing systematic. I keep the receipts and tickets and things from trips I've taken, but not other just for jog memory. But I haven't. Occasionally, I'll see something that I really enjoy, and we'll get that. What do I have? I have a Saint Helena coin on my desk. So. With Jonathan the tortoise, so that's a portable souvenir.
There you go.
Wow, you've got wonderful fans tuning in. It's incredible to introduce you to EPS. Congratulations on the upcoming book and incredible stuff you're doing, and all of you all in Philippine Global Explorers are doing with this new organization. It's wonderful.
Thank you. It's been great to be here and share our mission and vision and inspire other people in the great world travel experience, and continue to inspire. I think it's quite timely right now as we kind of um, continue what happens post pandemic, right, and get back to what would be the new normal of world travel. you know um, let's not let the virus or the pandemic stop us from exploring our beautiful world. It is there for generations to come, to enjoy, to share, and to inspire, and to learn. Yeah.
Beautifully said, and I think all of us hope to meet you in the wild someday with your incredible insights and your incredible fashion. Thank